Welcome to the latest edition of Don't Take This as Gospel. I'm Mike Partika, and we are going over some basics of Scientology. I've got my S shirt ready to go here. So let's talk a little bit about the objective of Scientology. Like, what are you aiming for in being a member of Scientology? And it turns out that the state of being that you are aiming toward is becoming clear. Now, what does clear mean? Well, there's two levels on which clear operates. One of which is, according to this quote from the Book of Case Remedies, clear is the name of a button on an adding machine. When you push it, all the hidden answers in the machine clear, and the machine can be used for a proper computation. So long as the button is not pressed, the machine adds all old answers to all new efforts to compute, and wrong answers result. People who have old fixed answers reacting when they try to think get wrong answers when they try to solve their current problems. We clear the old senseless answers which won't let them get more sensible answers. Well, really, that's all clear is. Clear is having been cleared of wrong or useless answers which keep you from living or thinking. Now, that's a pretty, pat explanation for that. So that doesn't really need a whole lot of elaboration except for the fact of where do we get these old answers. And it's not just a matter of, maybe we learned ways of thinking in the past, through conscious development, that are now clouding our ability to reason clearly. Like the idea that, maybe we were taught some things when we were a child that, our parents tried to instill these particular values in us, but those values don't actually serve us that well, and therefore we should, reset those values to a more of a null state and then figure out for ourselves what our values should be, things like that. That all takes place kind of at the conscious level. But the thing about Scientology is that Scientology puts much more emphasis on the subconscious mind. In fact, L. Ron Hubbard, who is the founder of Scientology, and yes, I do mean the science fiction writer, he was both the founder of Scientology and a science fiction writer who actually did a pretty darn good job. I really, if you've ever seen the movie Battlefield Earth, I've heard it's terrible, but the book Battlefield Earth was very, very good. In fact, I think I've got a copy of it that I haven't read in years, but I remember being incredibly impressed by it, so I have to return to that someday. But L. Ron Hubbard spoke of the reactive mind, meaning the subconscious mind. And I'm basically trying to make an analogy here, so forgive me if I'm not exact. If anybody with an actual knowledge of Scientology happens to be watching this. The reactive mind is the more subconscious mind that comes into play either when you're unconscious or when you are in a state of pain or shock or trauma that has shut down your analytical faculties. Like, let's say that you are in the middle of a school shooting or something like that, and you hear the gunshots go off, and your conscious mind kind of takes a dive, and the subconscious mind that just wants to get you the hell out of there so that you can survive takes over, and maybe you're running, and maybe you hear somebody say something while you're running, like, we've got to get away, or we've got to run as fast as we can, we've got to do this or that. It is at those moments of trauma when your conscious mind is dampened, or in moments of pain, or when you're asleep and maybe you're overhearing things that are being said because your ears are still working even if your conscious mind is shut off. So you're hearing things that while you're asleep, and these things can all go in to your subconscious, into your reactive mind, and program you. Scott Adams has this metaphor of we're all moist robots, and so we accept inputs inputs that can be, chemicals in the way of food, in the way of drink, in the way of drugs. But we're also moist robots in the sense that our brains, which are part of us, which are part of our bodies, have this lower level of processing that L. Ron Hubbard calls the reactive mind, that is absorbing things even as our conscious mind is unaware. And it is those things that provide the wrong answers of which L. Ron Hubbard speaks in talking about needing to be cleared, needing to be reset from those wrong answers, to be set free from those wrong answers. And the interesting thing about Scientology is that in Scientology it is believed that the reactive mind goes all the way back to when you were in utero. So there could be snippets of conversation that you hear as an unborn child that could wind up programming you in some way, shape, or form. And it is actually emphasized very much in Scientology that whenever you are around a pregnant woman, you take much caution with your speech, especially if the pregnant woman is in pain, if she gets traumatized in some way. And during the birth process, they recommend natural birth. They recommend that the child be placed on the mother's chest very soon after birth, so that there's a lessening of trauma. And in the birth center, wherever it is, that if it's an operating, it could be an operating room, a maternity ward, it could be, your home if you've got a midwife there or something, you remain quiet as possible, so that the child who has just been born and is in the midst of this very traumatic birth experience does not receive messages that will then become programmed into him or her and wind up coming back to haunt the child later in life. Other examples of this, and I think this is the example that kind of clued L. Ron Hubbard in to the existence of the reactive mind in the first place, was that, if I remember correctly, he was either wounded himself or he was around a wounded person who, as they were discussing things around him, around the wounded person, was mentioning things like, well, this guy might never see again, or something like that. And sure enough, when the guy woke up from his injuries, he was blind. But here's the thing. He wasn't blind on account of his injuries. His eyes were actually undamaged. He could see just fine, but his mind wouldn't let him see, because he had been told while unconscious that his eyes might be damaged. And so it programmed his mind so that he thought that he was damaged, that his eyes were damaged, that he shouldn't be able to see. And so his mind imposed on the body this psychosomatic condition that he had to be psychologically trained out of, or cleared of, before he could see again. The same thing goes for really any time that you are in pain, that or if you are sleeping. There is a very, very strong admonition within Scientology that you do not say anything unless it's absolutely necessary around a person who is in a state of they call it anaton, and I don't remember what I think it was kind of like an analytical shutdown kind of term, but in this state of anaton, or this analytical lack of attention, you don't say anything that could possibly program the person. And so it's kind of interesting, because our instinct when somebody's in pain, when somebody's, a child trips and falls and hurts himself or something, our instinct is to comfort the child, and not just with, a pat on the back, but also with words. But Scientology would say that your words in that moment are extraordinarily dangerous, because in a state of pain, in a state of trauma, your words can go directly to the reactive mind and wind up putting a snare on the person's thinking in a way that they're going to have to be cleared of later. So that's one level. There's also the level of the emotional energy that comes into play in the midst of a traumatic event. If you are in a high stress situation, if you are, injured or in pain or otherwise traumatized, there is an emotional energy that is stored up in that, and that can be harmful to you as well. And it can last for years. It can persist for years. That energy can be detected by what they have, a device that they call an e-meter. It's an electropsychometer, and it's an e-meter for short. It consists of a couple of I'm going to give you a very primitive description of it, but it's a couple. It works kind of like a lie detector. You have a device with a gauge that you can calibrate with a needle that you calibrate to 0 when the person is holding these metal cans, and the metal cans sense the skin galvanic response, which is an electrical charge that happens when your brain is touching on something emotional. So if you are recounting an event that happened to you, and you have an emotional response to that event as you are recounting it, the needle will move. And it is the point of the person who is auditing you. Auditing is a process I'll talk about in the next video, to get you to a point where you have cleared out the emotional energy that is attached to that event. So clear works on 2 levels. One is you want to get rid of any messages in your unconscious mind that you have been programmed with in times of stress, in times of pain, in times of unconsciousness, that are now causing you to behave in ways that are unproductive to you, that could actually be harmful to you. And there are a whole host of psychosomatic illnesses that can result, as according to Scientology anyway, as a result of this kind of programming. And let me tell you about one, because, or actually 2 examples of that. First of all, programming in an unconscious state. Now, maybe you've heard about, hypnotizing someone when they're asleep. I've actually done that once, I think, to my mother. I was a child. I want to say I was, maybe a mid-teenager. And there was one point at which she was sleeping on the couch in the living room. She had just fallen asleep there. And we were supposed to get up early the next morning. And I was tired. I was tired that night. I really wanted to be able to sleep in. So I went over to my mom, and I kind of whispered to her, like, "Mom." And she actually went, "Uh-huh," while she was asleep. I said, "Tomorrow morning, you will not wake me up for any reason. Do you understand?" She goes, "Uh-huh." And then I went back to bed. Now, she was supposed to get me up at like 7 or 8 in the morning. I woke up naturally the next morning. She did not wake me up. Now, I don't know if we were running late, but at the very least, she did not get me up. So I feel like I actually did manage to program her unconsciousness so that at some point during the morning when she was supposed to wake me up, she did not. So, yay me for that morning. But that kind of goes to show, I mean, assuming that is what happened, that, yeah, you actually can be programmed while in an unconscious state. Another example of that actually comes from somebody who was a therapist. And he was talking about a woman who had a compulsion of pulling out her eyelashes. Or, yeah, she would pluck out her eyelashes obsessively, compulsively. I mean, it would just be, she would get to the point where she had no eyelashes left. And he talked her through, her life experiences and things like that, and finally got to the point where she was talking about her relationship with her mother. And she said, my mother would always tell me that when I get angry, I lash out. And he picked up on that. He was like, wait a minute, say that again? And she said, well, she says that whenever I get angry, I lash out. He said, okay, say it again. And she said, well, when I get angry, I lash out. And she realized that eyelash out was something that her mother had programmed her with, and that she was acting out in her compulsion. So that's kind of another example of how things can get stored in your subconscious, and they need to be brought out of there. And once it was brought out for her, she never did it again. So there, in all of us, there likely exists a whole bunch of these programs that we've got going on in our minds that we've stored up from childhood, and according to Scientology, maybe even before childhood. Maybe while we were still floating around in the womb and not really, understanding the sounds that we heard. But once we learned language, and then those sounds that we heard in the womb were able to actually coalesce in the back of our minds and say, oh, that's what that meant. Try to apply that in your life now, even though these are not programs that you would ever actually want to be run. And the cases that I read about in some of the Scientology literature I've seen had to do with, bedwetting and asthma and colds, even hemorrhaging at times, when, nosebleeds that wouldn't stop, that were stopped when these things were cleared out of the mind, out of the memory, out of the reactive memory, the subconscious level memory, that, these physical maladies were really manifestations of bad programming, where somebody had, taken the moist robot and fed it some bad code. So that is kind of an idea of what it means to be a Scientologist, in that you are trying to get to this condition of being clear and not have any of this bad programming, and also to be released from the energy that you may have stored up from these emotional traumatic experiences that you've suffered, so that your energy is not locked into those particular things. That energy is free to you to use for other things, because there is this waste of energy that you experience on account of suppressing the traumas that you've suffered in the past. So if you can get the energy out of you, then you have that much more power left to yourself, where you're no longer trying to stuff stuff in. Now you can actually take the energy you would have been using to hold all that stuff in and use it to your productivity in the world, to better your life, instead of just, keeping yourself contained. So how does a person go about this auditing process? Well, I'll have a little bit to talk about that in the next video. So please do subscribe so that you will know when that video comes out. And thank you for watching this latest installment of Don't Take This as Gospel. I'm Mike Partika, and I will catch you later.